Alright guys, welcome to another video. Today we're going to be investigating what made Enhancement Shaman so good in the Burning Crusade, and hopefully by the end of this video we'll have a better understanding of the class and spec, therefore the decision whether to play an Enhancement Shaman will be easier for you to make. So in order to understand what made an Enhancement Shaman suddenly a viable and desired class in the Burning Crusade, we must first understand the limitations of the spec during Classic WoW. The simple fact is that Enhancement Shamans didn't have the best sustained damage in the game, since the majority of their DPS is RNG based due to how Wind Fury weapon works with a two-handed weapon. This is why you're going to see most raid groups with 10 to 15 melee DPS as a combination of rogues and warriors rather than Enhancement Shamans. They also had issues with their mana, since none of their talents provided a significant support towards their mana efficiency. They also couldn't even use Stormstrike really unless a raid leader allowed it, since it would consume a debuff slot and it is a massive DPS increase. Nonetheless, in Classic, Enhancement Shamans still provide a decent amount of support for your melee groups, but in TBC they become considerably more useful with a boost to their own sustained DPS and their support capabilities. The major big change that made the enhancement a stronger DPS spec was the removal of a two-handed talent that was then swapped with a dual-wielding talent. This allowed a shaman to use two weapons and furthermore two weapon buffs, which means double Wind Fury buffs. And this generally meant that the DPS of the Enhancement Shaman became more sustained for longer boss fights, rather than relying too heavily on the Wind Fury procs and a slow two-handed weapon. Most Enhancement Shamans are going to focus on leveling up their blacksmithing to get the Drake Fist hammer, which eventually upgrades to Dragon Maw and Dragon Strike, since the hammer has a chance to increase your haste by 212 for 10 seconds and they can be dual wielded. And obviously this is going to have good synergy with Wind Fury weapon and other Shaman talents. The next big addition, which justifies bringing Enhancement Shaman rather than just sticking a Resto Shaman with Wind Fury Totem in the melee group, was the talent Unleashed Rage, which causes your critical melee strikes to increase the attack power of everyone in the party by 10%, and since this is a flat 10% boost, it scales as other raiders get better and better gear. So this talent is an absolute godsend when included with Wind Fury Totem, and it doesn't take you long to get good enough gear to maintain this buff constantly, since it's not difficult to crit every 10 seconds when your weapons are hitting so frequently, and obviously with your Wind Fury procs mixed in. 3 key talents were also added to increase a shaman's mana efficiency in longer fights. First of all, we have Shamanistic Focus, that reduces the mana cost of your next shock ability by 60%, so again, once your gear is good enough, this buff here is basically constantly available, which means you can burn more mana with your shock spell since the mana cost is actually much smaller. Next there is Mental Quickness, which reduces the mana cost of all instant cast abilities by 6% permanently, and obviously a cheeky spell power buff based on your attack power. And lastly, you have the Shamanistic Rage cooldown at the end of a talent tree that gives you a chance to regenerate mana whenever you deal a melee strike for a total of 30 seconds, right? And some dungeon bosses, they last 30 seconds, so this is a really strong cooldown, particularly since it also has a cheeky 30% damage reduction to the total duration for the total duration also. Obviously Enhancement also had the improved Weapon Totems talent, although that was also in vanilla. Another cool gimmick of playing an Enhancement Shaman that I know a lot of people will enjoy is the fact that you have enough hit increasing talents to not physically need any hit gear to hit that special ability cap. Hit chance on your gear obviously will also increase your DPS marginally, but you don't really need to worry about it like other classes do. I don't know about you, but messing around with your gear and not always being able to equip a item upgrade the second you get it can be very frustrating due to that hit cap requirement. For Enhancement Shaman, the gearing process is much simpler because your talents just have you sorted. So mid-raid, when you get a little bit of a gear upgrade, you can just equip it instantly and enjoy that gear piece, whereas if you're playing a rogue, a lot of the time you may not actually be able to equip that gear piece because it will put you below the hit cap. Because debuff slots were increased in TBC, Shaman also allowed to use their Stormstrike ability, which gives a huge damage bonus because it strikes with both weapons, and also increases the damage of the next 2 nature abilities by 20%, which would also obviously be consumed by damage shock to boost VATS damage, but unfortunately this debuff could also be consumed by a random rogue poison proc or an insect storm tick. However, it could also be consumed by an elemental shaman's chain lightning, which is obviously pretty decent, but you probably only see it, it's very RNG obviously whether you are going to consume the debuff with something like chain lightning, but in a smaller group like a 5-man it's probably more likely to happen. So this meant that you can use Storm Strike on cooldown and maintain Flame Shock for extra damage, which means that your sustained damage was much better in TBC compared to Classic. Shamans could also take their playstyle even further to provide even more support to the raid by learning Totem Twisting. It's pretty simple but will require a lot of mana, so consumables are a requirement, but the trick is to pop Wind Fury Totem to give the group the 10-second buff that it provides and twist it with the Grace of Air Totem so that the group can benefit from both buffs for the entire fight. And this kind of little bit of extra work will really make you stand out in a raid group. Overall, Enhancement Shaman is going to be a highly desired spec for TBC raiding. You won't see a raid group stacking loads of them because you technically only need one per melee group to really get the benefits, and other DPS like warriors and rogues with warglaives will do more damage. But obviously that damage becomes even stronger with an Enhancement Shaman in the group, especially as Shamans also have Bloodlust and Heroism, provides the group with a 30% haste buff for 30 seconds, and though it can only affect one group in TBC, it can be used multiple times in a single boss fight. I think when the TBC obviously launches, many on the Horde side will probably respec into Enhancement or Elemental because they're probably very sick of playing Resto Shaman. So I honestly do think that both Elemental and Enhancement Shamans, they're going to be very popular in TBC, so it may be more difficult for you to get a raid spot on the Horde side, but I think there will be more demand on the Alliance side because obviously if we get a pre-patch with the ability to level a Shaman before TBC, before the Dark Portal opens, then you'll probably see honestly the same issue on the Horde side. There will be a lot of people playing Enhancement and Elemental, but if it releases how it did release back in the day, where people have to level up from level 1 when the Dark Portal opens, then there will probably be a really big demand for Shamans on the Alliance side. Although I imagine some guilds will do some insane mage dungeon boosting to get some Shamans in their raid group as quickly as possible. But generally I just think Shamans are going to be a good option for you to play in TBC because they're going to be highly desirable because they're such a useful support class. I mean, they really are up there with Shadow Priest, Enhancement, and Shamans are like the strongest supports in the game. Although it is important to mention that I think an Enhancement Shaman will have a much better time later on in the expansion, because the issue with TBC is that a lot of the melee DPS simply, well, they scale to do increased DPS as the expansion goes on, which means at the beginning of the expansion they don't really do, they aren't the strongest DPS in the game. It's not like Classic where rogues are just kings of DPS at the launch of, of Classic. Rogues and warriors, they do suck a little bit on the DPS meters compared to casters and ranged DPS like hunters and warlocks. But as the expansion progresses, melee DPS get massively buffed, and then the value of an Enhancement Shaman increases. So you probably see more people playing Enhancement Shaman in tier 5, tier 6 content, Battle for Mount Hyjal, Black Temple and Sunwell. So overall I think it will be a little bit more difficult to get a raid spot as an enhancement at the beginning of TBC, but a little bit easier in late TBC. I think most raid groups are probably only going to bring 1 to 2 at the end of the day. But anyway guys, that's where I'm going to end the video there. My name is Medigoblin. Until my next video, ciao.